You're watching Sky News. In just a moment, the press preview. Our first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. First, though, a reminder of our top stories here this evening. And Theresa May says President Trump has told her that he's 100% behind NATO. She was speaking beside him at a joint press conference at the White House. Iraqi forces say Islamic State were planning to launch missiles tipped with chemical warheads from western Mosul. And the UKIP leader Paul Nuttall says he believes water torture is a price worth paying if it helps save lives. Hello there, you're watching the press preview. A first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. Over the next half hour, we'll be seeing what's making the headlines with the journalist and author Rachel Shabi and David Cameron's former chief of staff, the PR consultant Alex Dean. So welcome to both of you.
Thank you very much.
So let's take a look at what's on those front pages then. And many of them have focused on Theresa May and Donald Trump's so-called special relationship. I want to hold your hand. The Mirror fronts with a picture of May and what it describes as a touchy-feely Trump holding her hand. The FT also features that same image, focusing on the two reaffirming their commitment to NATO. The warmth between the pair also makes the front of the Daily Mail. It calls their meeting a remarkable encounter on one of the most extraordinary days in the long history of UK-US relations. The special relationship is back on. Trump will visit Britain soon after being formally invited by the Queen. That's on the front of the Eye. And Brexit is a blessing for Britain. The Times leads with Donald Trump's endorsement of the UK's departure from the EU, along with the symbolic picture of the two posing for photographs at the bust of Sir Winston Churchill. Hand in hand, united we stand. Trump's promises of a golden era of friendship between the US and the UK features in the Express. And the couple's seemingly romantic walk at the White House leads the Telegraph. It quotes Theresa May's joke yesterday that when it comes to the special relationship, sometimes opposites attract. The new special relationship is the headline in The Guardian, which homes in on Donald Trump's vow not to bring back torture. And The Star has another revelation from the Big Brother house. So, lots to talk about there with journalist and author Rachel Shabi and PR consultant Alex Dean. So, I think I know where we're going to start.
The Star, obviously, in the Big Brother house.
He jokes. We're going to move, of course, in fact, we're going to start with the Telegraph, aren't we? Donald Trump and Theresa May, featuring on the front pages of nearly every single newspaper. The Daily Telegraph, hand in hand, the happy couple, and that extraordinary moment where they did actually hold hands coming out of the White House.
Yeah, there's a little slope at the colonnade, apparently, there, and the polite thing to do, if a lady's in high heels and it may be in difficulty going down the colonnade, is to offer your arm, and you can see that she grasps his hand in hers. So I think it arises out of that rather than a, hey, tell you what, it'll look good if we hold hands. But of course, that is the image that now goes around the world. And in my view is this is tremendous for our country. The first foreign head of government to visit Donald Trump after his inauguration, and of course, when Donald Trump says, as he said in his remarks, that our two nations have a special relationship which has underpinned justice and peace in the world, I believe that to be true. I believe that our shared history is a great one, and those are kinds of terms. They were both very keen to say special relationship over and over again in questions and in their remarks. Those were not terms that tripped with ease off the tongue of President Obama. It is unambiguously better for Britain to have a president who thinks positively and optimistically about Britain's future. This president does. And given that we voted for Brexit, a path that the last president set his face foursquare against, in my view, whatever you think about Donald Trump and whatever you think about our decision to leave the European Union, this is good.
OK, I mean, Rachel, what do you make of that? I mean, would you agree that the press conference did appear to have a certain amount of warmth? They did seem to be praising each other at the very least. Is that a good sign?
I don't think it's a good sign for Britain, not remotely. I mean, I think it's one thing to have an ideological disagreement with a US president. So, you know, you could say that, you know, the British Prime Minister and a US president are at odds ideologically. And that
they did over Ukraine, didn't they?
Hang on, and that happens, and that's fine, and you still need to work within that relationship. This is not a normal situation. This is not a normal ideological difference. This is not a normal president. And the fact that Theresa May has gone there and is the first world leader to do so has normalised something which is actually abnormal.
You think she shouldn't go?
Absolutely. I'm saying she should bide her time and wait and see. On the same day that she went, this is the guy that vowed to build a wall with Mexico, that vowed to impose a partial Muslim ban, and that wants to have controls or to monitor crimes committed by migrants. These are not normal ideological differences. These are really dangerous far-right authoritarian moves that are shocking the world over. And for the UK to talk about having shared values with somebody who talks in those terms is absolutely morally abhorrent at a time when Britain, as a world leader and as the first government, as the first minister to meet the president, should be setting a tone for the world.
Well, you don't think she should have met with him anyway, so
and not normalising
not
any of this. Not normalising any of this,
Well,
because
hang on.
it's not normal.
Oh, let me answer what Rich said. Well, do you think there would ever be a time when it would be appropriate for her to visit, given what you've said?
I mean, yeah, absolutely. Look, she
When?
can visit. Wait and see. And when you do visit, draw some red lines and don't talk about shared values with a man who wants to ban Muslims from his country, erect a wall and monitor crimes committed by migrants, just to name a few highlights that are beyond most people's red lines.
What he did today was say that he wanted
and support
to have
torture.
new legislation. No, there's two things that our Prime Minister can point to and say, look at what changed. He resigned from his position on torture and he pledged his support to NATO.
Well, he said
Both
his
things,
belief was it probably worked, but he was going to give the decision to his new Defence Secretary,
which
who
is very
didn't agree
different from
with
the
his
position
point
that
of view,
he'd had
didn't he?
before. So I think if you were our Prime Minister, you can point to those things and say, we're already making headway. But moreover, like it or not, he is now the president. And like it or not, we are now, our relationship with the Americans is more important than ever. But even if we weren't leaving the European Union, any British Prime Minister would seek to talk to the President of the United States. And if Ed Miliband had won the election, he would be there now.
OK, but how do you think Theresa May will be happy about this image being across the front pages? Because is it awkward for her to be seen to be very close to Donald Trump, given some of the views that he holds that some people in this country don't agree with?
I think if you watched any of the part of their exchange, she stood up for herself on the things where they disagreed, Ukraine being a good example, but she sought to make the most of their agreements, and that's what diplomacy is. As far as a picture is concerned, of course I accept that you look close when that happens. Some people will like that. Some people who don't like it or don't like Trump will hopefully understand our Prime Minister's there to do a job. This is more important than ever to get it right. We should be rallying behind our Prime Minister and supporting her.
Your operational frame is that...
It's reality. He is the president.
No, it's your version of reality. It's not the only version, Alex. What I'm saying to you
Who's the other president?
What I'm saying to you is your operational frame that we should be getting closer to the US. Given what the US president stands for, given what he has said, he doesn't particularly respect the world order that currently exists, and that world order has guaranteed peace and liberal values for some time. He has quite clearly said that he wants to topple those things.
He must be much happier because of the NATO thing.
So, in that context, to ally with the US at this time would appear unwise.
Do you see it as progress?
It is our most important ally.
Say that even though you're... No. You might say that even though we're leaving the EU, that doesn't mean we should be casting ourselves adrift from Europe at this time, that actually we should be strengthening security and other ties with Europe.
It was a basic point. It is our most important alliance, isn't it?
Well, it's not. Is it necessarily our most important alliance?
Yes,
militarily, given the direction of travel that it's going in.
We are their largest investor. They are our largest investor. More than 1 million Brits work for American companies every day. More than 1 million Americans work for British companies every day. It is by some way our most important relationship.
What about the prospects for trade post-Brexit?
Well,
I mean, Theresa May is obviously keen to strike a deal, and this is the start of that process, isn't it? Clearly, nothing formal can be signed until we have exited the EU, which will be at least 2 years away. But do you see this as a good sign that a trade deal might be a good thing for Britain?
Well, look, I mean, let's look at the evidence. First of all, as you said, there's nothing that can be done until Britain formally leaves the EU.
That's not true.
Hang on, just
Oh.
Hang on a second.
What you said isn't true.
Hold your fire for just a second. So, given that this is likely to antagonise Europe in negotiations, I don't think it's that smart a card to play.
Okay.
Given that Donald Trump has said that he's very protectionist about the US, I don't know what could be achieved. But in any case, what is it that that trade is going to bring? What is it that the US is promising the UK? Is it that Theresa May wants to sell off chunks of the NHS? Is it that she wants to lower health and safety standards in the UK and therefore expose consumers to something that they don't necessarily want or need to be exposed to? What
when you
is it
throw around
that's
these
coming?
scaremongering terms like that, what do you think you mean? What do you think selling off the NHS means?
Would privatise bits of it, perhaps? I think that's a fairly clear term, and I don't think it's scaremongering. It's openly discussed.
Our NHS is a huge market which buys many things and requires many services. We don't have a single market in services with the EU as it is, and we buy many products from the EU in health, and we buy many products from the US. Tariffs can go down, and we can make access easier for better drugs and for better treatments that may help patients. Privatisation of things, if that's what's going to happen, isn't always necessarily bad. That's why the Labour Party pursued parts of it. And furthermore, you know, GPs aren't employees, right? You know, people always have this idea that we've got a vast monolithic healthcare system, and in some ways we do. But you should look at what GPs are before you start suggesting that it's inevitably bad, that there's any element of the private sector or competition in the healthcare system.
Let me just put Rachel's point to you about antagonising potentially the other members of the European Union, given that there is a delicate negotiation that needs to go on to exit ourselves from the EU.
Rachel had 2 points. That was one point, and which is fairly made. The other point Rachel said was there's nothing you can do until we've left. And that isn't true. We are perfectly able to conduct conversations and talks with America or indeed other countries. And that's been confirmed by Michel Barnier, the chief negotiator for the EU. It does help to, you know, read about it and think about it. Barnier has confirmed there's nothing they can do to stop the British having those conversations with other countries. And indeed, Liam Fox's International Trade Department has confirmed we're already in talks with 12 countries. Do you think the government's lying, or do you agree that's happening?
There's nothing to stop you having those conversations. But
so when you said there's nothing you can do, it wasn't true, was it?
Meaning you can't actually sign a trade deal within the next 2 years, can you?
True, you cannot
That's
put pen to
what
paper.
I meant.
OK, we're agreed. Let's move on very quickly to the Times finally. We'll talk about other stories in the papers in a moment, but this is such a big moment that we're looking at a lot of the front pages coverage. The Times have gone for a different picture. They haven't gone for that hand-holding moment. Churchill's bust.
Obama took the bust out and then was suggested he didn't really mean it. There was no harm meant. It was just, you know, the art collection gets changed from time to time. Really, given the story that it was, you could have just put it back then. But of course, they stuck out their guns. Interestingly, I found out in the States last week that Obama had not been to a single event at the British Embassy in 8 years, in his entire time as president. Now, there's, you know, being busy, and then there's making a point. Whereas this president, first foreign head of government he receives is Theresa May. One of the first things he does is put back Churchill's bust. Good for him.
I mean, to be fair about the bust, there is another version of this story, which is that it was specifically on loan for the tenure of Obama's presidency. Now, if they've extended that...
But it went out years before. That was the point with the Obama removal.
Anyway, another symbolic photograph on the front of the Times. And we can leave Donald Trump and Theresa May in the second half of our paper review. You can't go anywhere, though. Lots more to talk about, including find out if the old wives' tale, feed a cold, starve a fever, really is the best remedy. Welcome back. You're watching the Press Preview. With me tonight, the journalist and author Rachel Shabby and David Cameron's former Chief of Staff, the PR consultant Alex Dean. And we're going to delve inside the papers this time. You've picked out the story about Labour's approach to the Brexit bill, the bill for triggering Article 50, and the fact that a front bench Labour member of the Labour team has quit. This is the Shadow Welsh Secretary Jo Stevens saying that she can't abide by Jeremy Corbyn's 3-line whip on the issue. He's told his MPs that they have to make sure that the bill goes through.
Yeah. I mean, this is a horrible situation for Labour. You know, unlike the other parties, it has Leave and Remain voters. So, you know,
I suppose the other parties do have that too, to an extent,
not
but perhaps
to this degree,
not so much.
though.
Yeah.
So obviously it does have Labour MPs who are sitting in constituencies that voted overwhelmingly to Remain. However, that said, you know, the referendum vote does have to be respected, and Labour can't be seen to thwart a democratic vote. So it's a horrible situation for Labour. And I would say the only thing that it can focus on really is the kind of Brexit that happens, and that is for Parliament
and
to
Labour
work on
is
and
tabling
to
amendments
hold
as
the
part of
government to account. Yeah,
I agree that's definitely what Labour should be doing. I also agree with Rachel that's what Labour's problem is, that they have this split voter base. All the parties in Westminster have split MPs. Indeed, majority of Tory MPs the majority were for Remain. But when it comes to what you do with Article 50, yes or no, Labour Party is the party that's really split on it. And Corbyn's made the interesting tactical decision to say, we will back Article 50 now and it must go through. And some 6 frontbenchers who haven't gone yet, not counting these 2 who have already resigned, but 6, including 2 whips who are going to vote against themselves in the whipping process, have said they're going to vote against Article 50 and thereby dare their leader to sack them. Well, he may or may not do that, although we've seen that he's been, frankly, running out of talent a little bit on the Labour benches already. But even if he doesn't and he kind of lets it go, it reveals the bigger problem that Labour is in. Because I think Rachel's right. They should be saying, whilst we don't agree with leaving the EU, the vote's happened, we now need to respect it, and Article 50 needs to be invoked. That isn't what these MPs are saying. They are saying, we don't want Article 50 to go through. Now, of course, that may develop into, they're putting lots of amendments down to say, not unless you do this, not unless you do that, the committee is on a statutory basis, unless we see the basis on which you're leaving. But really, what they're trying to do is, this few so far, is stop Article 50 at all. And that is a direct challenge now to Corbyn's leadership. He decided to make it so, quite bravely on one view, but nevertheless, that's what it is.
OK, I'm sure we'll hear lots more about that in the days ahead. Let's move on to another story, though, that you've seen in The Times. This is connected to the proposed repairs that need to be done to Parliament, to House of Commons.
A 250-page report has been published in What Happens Next with Parliament, going from what they call partial decanting, where MPs come out slowly over time and then go back in again. That takes 32 years to complete. Or they can speed it up and have much more of Parliament move out as a whole. Either way, it looks like major events, like lying in state, would have to go to St Paul's if Parliament gets the facelift that it desperately needs. And to be clear, it really is. I mean, it's a Grade 1 listed Victorian building that is in desperate need of repair.
And do you think that's should be a priority, that the repairs, because it costs a huge amount of money, doesn't it?
A priority.
£3.9 billion restoration project.
Compared to what? Priority compared
Yeah, quite.
to what? I mean, it doesn't look great when cuts are being made elsewhere. That's true, but it's the House of Parliament. It's work that needs to be done.
Seat of democracy.
I agree.
Seat of democracy.
One of the big things is massive fire risk. And given that the last Palace of Westminster burnt down, we should probably get on with it.
OK, let's move on and resolve this big burning question. Should we agree, should we stick by this old saying, starve a fever and feed a cold? What's
No.
that? Oh.
The answer is you should eat through a cold. You use protein up, you use up your energy, you need to eat through a cold. Good news for everybody.
And a fever. Because it's
you just
starve
eat,
a fever
just
and
eat.
Just eat.
Yeah.
So do we know where it came from originally? Why
Rachel
people...
does.
Well, this piece does. It apparently came at a time when there were more risks to ill people from the bacteria in food, at a time when that was more a thing. And now that it isn't,
it's just
then
fine to keep on eating.
No need. Yeah, we just carry on eating.
The dietitians they quote say that is actually now the worst advice you could give. Don't listen to it anymore. Your mum said so, your dad said so, your grandmother said so, but actually ignore it. Eat through a cold.
I think most people will applaud that.
Yeah.
If any advice to carry on eating is always good, isn't it? Rachel and Alex, good to see you. We'll be back again at 11:30 with another selection. Thanks very much indeed.